Diet bars, healthy cereals, low fat, low sugar, red wine, honey. Are any of these things actually good for us, or are we making mistakes? Hi guys, welcome back. So this is one on the types of things commonly seen in people's diets, which I believe are mistakes and are not going to make it easy for those people to lose body fat. So we're talking about diets that lead to a lean and healthy body. First one I've got is cereal bars and cereals, healthy cereals. So I see all the time, you know, people on diets and they're bringing packed lunches to work, and in the packed lunch you've got these like health bars, which are generally like compressed cereal grains and maybe some dried fruit, maybe some chocolate chips or whatever, and they've always got like healthy packets on them. You know, it says like low sugar or low fat, pictures of farmland and sort of just a healthy idea. I know I was brought up in the 80s and my mum was constantly buying those things because that's kind of when they started around the 80s, I guess, with like tracker bars and stuff. And my mum would start putting those in my lunch boxes because she was sure at the time they were much healthier. And you know, I'll go out there and say this, they're healthier than a chocolate bar. You know, if you were going to put a Mars bar in your lunch and you decided against that and opted for a cereal bar instead, is that a better choice? Sure. Yeah, it's better than a Mars bar. I'll give you that one. But, you know, I wasn't eating Mars bars for lunch at the time, and my mum just thought they were actually some health benefit to these things. So what is bad about them? Well, if you were going to make a whole grain bar at home, I wouldn't have a huge problem with it. You know, if you were actually taking some whole grain oats, rolled oats, and blending them up, you know, with some normal raw ingredients and making your own bars, I think that would be the most sensible way to do it. But let's be honest here, if you are going to do that, and I've made some lovely homemade flapjacks like that before and all kinds of like whole grain cereal type of baked goods, that they are high in calories. So if I was on a weight loss diet, I probably wouldn't be baking those things for myself at home because their very nature, they're quite dense. You have to kind of stick them together with something like honey or something along those lines, or sugar. You want them to taste sweet, because if you don't put any sort of sweetener in it at all, no honey, no sugar, then it's basically going to taste like absolute cardboard. You know, there's no taste to it at all. And even add in a bunch of dried fruit, like people might say, okay, well, I blended up some dates. Well, the bottom line is you're still getting a load of sugar in there. And this is the bit I want to get onto. So people have a misunderstanding about sugar. They automatically think like white sugar is bad. You know, some people think, oh, brown sugar's a bit better. And then, you know, if you don't have those two things, and if you use something else instead, like dried fruit blended up, then that's going to be somehow better for you because it's derived from fruit. The bottom line is our body processes all those things the same. You know, they're all broken down in the body in exactly the same way, and they're going to shoot your insulin levels sky high, and that's going to shuttle things around the body. The sugars are going to be shuttled around the body, the glycogen's going to be shuttled around. When we have too much glycogen in the body and we're not burning it off quickly, then that gets converted to fat and stored as fat. And the other thing insulin will do is shuttle fat around the body and put that into fat storage as well, which I've discussed before on belly fat. I did an episode on that. That tends to be where you sort of store, if you see someone eating a lot of like high sugar carb foods, that tends to be where they tend to accumulate fat, is around the midsection. So the body doesn't sort of differentiate between those two. And the other thing is, when you're buying these cereal bars from the supermarket, or these whole grain cereals from the supermarket, you know, your Special K's and all that, Those are basically whole grains that have been blended and processed in a factory down to powders. Then they've been recompressed together, all stuck together and sent out the door. And when you eat them, they break down in the body very, very quickly. You know, it's not like cooking your own porridge at home, and that's going to take ages to break down. So you get this nice slow release of glycogen into the bloodstream. These processed carbs are incredibly quick into the bloodstream, and that is no different than eating the sugar. So eating those processed carbs is going to shoot your insulin levels sky high just the same, and it's going to predispose you to start going into like fat storage mode. The only caveat I would make is if you were going to train really hard, you know, if you were about to go on like a really long hike, you were walking up Mount Snowdon, or you're going to go down the gym and really hit the weights, then maybe having a cereal bar before or after that is a pretty sensible idea, because you're going to need that glycogen and you're going to use it. If you're using the glycogen, like when you finish the gym, your glycogen levels are very low in your bloodstream. If you then eat something that's got a high GI, you know, a high glycemic index, and you're replenishing all that glycogen, it's not necessarily going to be stored as fat because your body actually requires it to be replenished. So if it's about context as well, but a lot of people I see with cereal bars and cereals, you know, they're in very sedentary jobs, they're just sitting at a desk, they're, you know, eating these things and thinking that that's somehow healthy for them. Frankly, it just isn't, and there are better options out there. You'd be better off with an apple, for example, because that has a lot less sugar in it, a lot less carbohydrates in it, it's got more fiber in it, it's got more vitamins in it, and it takes a lot longer to break down in the body, so less glycemic load. So the next big one I see, people consuming foods that they've bought from the supermarket that are labelled as low fat or low sugar. That's a cunning sales technique used by these huge food manufacturers, and let's not forget, you know, their whole game is to sell as many products as they can. They're in competition with each other, and they're going to sell as many products as they can. They want to make the most profit possible on that product, so they're going to use the cheapest possible ingredients, sell it at the best price that they can get away with competitively. They're going to use the best psychological marketing tricks to get you to buy their product. And one of those tricks is, of course, labeling it low sugar or low fat, because we're all attracted to what appears to be something healthier for us. So I'll give an example of yogurts. So we commonly see yogurts labeled as low fat, and we think, oh, well, that's great, you know, that must be really healthy, I'll just eat that. Labeling a yogurt low fat is slightly disingenuous, because actually the issue that you would really have with yogurt is the fact that it's probably quite high in sugars and carbohydrates, and it's going to have quite a lot of calories. So the fat side of things is not particularly that alarming, and labeling it as low fat, well, so what? You know, that's no big deal. It would be much, if you were going to be honest about it, you would just say, how many calories has this got in it, and what are the ingredients? But notice they're not saying low fat and low sugar, because they wouldn't get away with that, because it's normally one or the other, and both of those things are going to have a calorific content, so it's not something that you can just get away with eating whenever you like. Again, yogurt's got a place in diet, so I actually like yogurts in terms of, especially like a natural yogurt with the bacteria in it that are good for your gut biome. I think that's great. And if you're having that as part of a calorie controlled diet, and you've taken into account how many calories are in that yogurt, and then you've put that into your diet, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But that's not what I see people doing. I see people just eating yogurts, like way more yogurts than they probably should if they're trying to lose body fat, and they almost see these things as like a free meal, you know, like, oh, it doesn't even count towards my calories because it says it's low fat or whatever on the outside. And that just isn't the case. You know, they're not a freebie. There's very little in the diet world that's a freebie, and if it is, it's probably something that you wouldn't particularly want to use as a snack. I mean, give some examples. Celery's pretty low in calories, but you don't see many people walking around with a box of celery, despite the fact you could get away with eating quite a lot of that. The same with a lot of the green leafy salad stuff, you know, that's only really palatable if you tip a load of olive oil over it and balsamic vinegar, and then it's not low in calories. So things that are truly low in calories, that are truly like you can eat as much as you want, people don't tend to want to eat those, funnily enough. So fruit juice and smoothies. Now, this was another one from the 80s. You know, my mum was constantly giving us all orange juice and apple juice and saying it was a healthier option. And again, healthier compared to drinking like a bottle of Coke. Yeah, if it's like full sugar Coke versus maybe some fruit juice, it might be that the fruit juice is slightly better for you. I say might because actually if you look at a lot of the breakdowns of the sugar content, it isn't particularly much different. You know, having a great big glass of orange juice, especially from concentrate out of a carton, you know, isn't massively different to drinking a full sugar Coca-Cola or something like that. But people associate it with fruit, and therefore they associate that as being somehow healthier. The body doesn't distinguish that. You know, when you drink that orange juice, the body isn't like, you haven't got a little man in your stomach that goes, oh good, this is orange juice, it came from a fruit, I'm going to process that slightly differently. That doesn't happen. The body just processes it all the same, shoots your glycemic index sky high, got all that glycogen running around the bloodstream. We're back in that situation where we're shooting our insulin levels up. We're going into fat storage mode because you've taken in these calories. Suddenly your insulin's, you know, pushing all this stuff around the body. And again, if you were doing some, you know, a marathon, or you were just finished at the gym or something, you might actually get away with having that, and you would need to replace your glycogen. But at any other time of the day, you just don't need to be doing that, and it's going to predispose you to fat storage. And also people tend to do that in conjunction with other things they're eating. They'll have a glass of orange juice with X, Y, and Z foods that they're consuming. So you might be consuming some really healthy foods, like you might get up in the morning and have porridge, which is fairly low on the glycemic index because those oats take a long time to break down. So you've made an effort to eat something really good, and then you neck half a pint of orange juice with it. So you might as well not have bothered eating anything really good because you just shot your glycemic index through the roof. And what's the point of eating something low GI if you're just going to drink a high GI drink along with it? It makes no sense at all. So have a water. You know, don't concern yourself with the fruit juices, and they're a treat. You know, if you really like orange juice, have it as a treat, you know, at the end of the week or whatever, whenever you have your cheat meal, have it then. But again, it's not like a free-for-all just because it comes from fruit. And the other one that people are always surprised about, I'll make exactly the same comments about smoothies. You know, people think, oh, I've blended a load of fruit up, that's going to be really good for me. Well, you've taken that fruit that was quite fibrous and would take quite long to break down in your stomach. Even if you chewed it fairly thoroughly, it's still going to be quite bulky and fibrous when it's swallowed, and your body's going to break that down over time. So that's why fruit sugars are considered a little bit better than your processed sugars, is because they're normally wrapped in a bunch of fibre, they've got a bunch of vitamins and minerals in and phytonutrients, which are all beneficial for the body, but that sugar's taking a lot longer to get in the system, and the system is quite good at processing sugars when it's over a very elongated period of time. It's really bad at processing sugars when it's like a quick hit. And you know, one of the worst would be like your high fructose corn syrup that you find in a lot of the sugary sodas and stuff like that, because that's really quick into the body. So instead of having the smoothie, just have the fruit instead. You know, you don't need to blend it all up and pretend you're like some cool person from California waking up next to the pool or whatever. That's unnecessary. If you like blueberries, eat some blueberries, chuck them in whole in your porridge. You know, if you like strawberries, whatever it is, just eat them, put them in your porridge, or just eat them as normal. You don't need to blend it all up. But some people think that like blending it up makes the thing more like bioavailable to you. That's absolute nonsense. You know, that's kind of thing that was being bandied about around 10 years ago, that people were into all this like raw everything and blend everything up and wheatgrass smoothies everywhere. Look, you're not going to get like a massively different nutrient profile from fruit just because you've blended it up. And like I said, you're going to spike your insulin levels through the roof for no apparent reason. All this stuff about insulin, you might be concerned about as well if you're diabetic, or if you're borderline diabetic, or if you're worried about becoming diabetic. You know, these are definitely things to avoid, because this is the sort of thing that leads you to become type 2 diabetic. If you're consuming all these high carb snacks all the time and you're thinking that they're healthy options for you, you're actually promoting huge bursts of insulin release, which over time is maybe going to lead to you becoming type 2 diabetic. So avoid, avoid, avoid. So another one on the carb sugar route, I see this a lot. People that say, oh no, this is healthier because I used honey. So I see people sweetening like teas and coffees with honey, people baking using honey instead of sugar, people having, you know, honey on toast, or honey or peanut butter on toast or something, and they're saying, oh well, that's the healthier option. Again, something I saw a lot in the 80s, and it seems to have stuck. The only benefit with honey is that if you've got really decent quality honey, so not this processed junk that they sell at the supermarket, but if you happen to, you know someone down the road who actually keeps bees, and they're going to give you a pot of honey from their hive, it's probably got loads of really good nutrients in it, because there will be loads of contaminants, if you like, but those contaminants are natural contaminants, and they're going to contain vitamins, minerals. So I'm talking about like plant matter and stuff like that that's made its way in there. That's going to be really good for you in terms of your nutrient intake. And then there's certain types of honey, your manuka honey and stuff, that may have its own benefits. So if you're taking the honey as like a nutrient rich thing that's going to add to your it's going to add to your vitamin and mineral intake, and you've got some specific type of super honey for that, okay, that's fine. But you also need to understand it's shooting your glycemic index through the roof, same thing, insulin levels sky high, and it's going to be high in calories. So you're going to have to add that in as part of your calorific intake. So when you're working out your diet, if you're chucking honey into all your hot drinks, that's going to add a lot of calories to each of those cups of tea or coffee you're having. You need to put that into your calories for the day. I would strongly suggest don't use honey as a sweetener. If you're going to have to sweeten a drink, maybe use stevia or something like that, which is a natural sweetener which has virtually no calories at all. It doesn't quite taste the same. Sucralose, another one. You know, there's a few sweeteners out there that I know people are really anti-sweeteners. Now, I've got quite strong feelings on this. A lot of the anti-sweetener stuff came from sweetener manufacturers about 15 odd years ago, were having this huge sort of competitive market going on, and they were all like playing dirty tricks on each other, releasing things about one another's products that are still hanging around today. So a lot of the aspartame stuff that people talk about was all based around some of this kind of falsely alleged things, which apparently came from the manufacturers of saccharin. I don't know how true that is, but there was certainly a lot of kind of dirty talking between the companies at the time. There was also some very, very dubious studies which have hung around that people still cite. So the famous one with the aspartame was the rat studies which were conducted, and they said, oh God, you know, these rats all ended up with cancer. Well, firstly, those studies were pretty much, completely ignored by anyone with any sort of sound scientific background, because when they looked into the study, which is the reason that you peer review studies, that you have other scientists look at them and don't just accept them at will. And when those things were peer reviewed, the other scientists ripped them apart and said, look, these studies are not worth the paper they're printed on. The methodology was shockingly bad. The the rats that were picked for these studies were supposed to be like randomized samples. They all came from the same bloodline at the same lab. It's entirely plausible that those rats that were chosen actually had some sort of genetic issue with that bloodline of rats, and that's why they all had some sort of problem. The so-called cancer was actually misdiagnosed entirely. It wasn't a cancer, it was some sort of other fairly benign growth from what I can understand. And there was a host of other issues with them as well. And since those studies, one of the other important parts of scientific study is it is replicated. So, you know, if I do a study that finds out something that's groundbreaking, then another 10 people can all do that study and they all find out the same thing as I do. And then we all get together and you look at the results and you go, yeah, that's science. You know, that's a conclusion that we've all come to the same conclusion with all our different studies. If you get one study that finds something and then no other studies find something, that normally means that the study that found something was entirely flawed and wrong because none of the others were able to find it. But people on the internet love to kind of cite these singular studies and kind of hark back to it and go, oh no, you know, aspartame causes cancer because of X study. They don't even know if that study was sound, which it wasn't, and they don't even know if it's been replicated, which it hasn't. So that's why the FDA and various other food organisations have signed these things off as safe. I think the dosage for sweeteners for aspartame that's considered safe is around 40 to 50 milligrams per kilo of body weight. And if you break that down, that's about 18 cans of soda a day. So, you know, if you're drinking more than 18 cans of soda a day, then you've got some serious issues anyway, because like that's just bizarre. And, you know, it goes to show that the recommended daily allowance that you could have quite safely is way higher than any of us would normally intake anyway, unless you were, you know, very odd. Alcohol. So people talk about healthy alcohol. Well, there is no healthy alcohol. Wait, there is. I read it in the newspaper. It said red wine's healthy. Red wine is not healthy. No alcohol is healthy. And then the next thing people always state is, well, it is because the Mediterraneans have it and they're really healthy. Yes, there are Mediterranean regions where the diet is thought to have helped people live slightly longer lives, but you have to look at the whole picture there. So in those regions as well, they tend to really look after their older people as part of their culture. So they don't just bung them in a care home and kind of wait for them to die of boredom. The housing in those regions is normally intergenerational. So grandma would live at home. She would live a very active life. You would often find in those traditional Mediterranean homes that the grandma would be, say, taking an active role in cooking, in looking after the kids. Now, we've got a lot of medical data that supports the fact that if you stay physically and mentally active, you live longer. So there's one of the reasons that they would probably live longer. They're not in a care home. So, you know, we know that being bored and lonely and having nothing to do at all and being stuck in a care home would probably shorten people's lives because they become very depressed and they haven't got a reason to carry on. So again, giving them that sense of community, they tend to have active social lives because there's respect for senior citizens in those places. So there's active clubs and things going on for them to actually partake in. And yes, the diet would definitely play a part, but you have to look at the diet as a whole. They're eating diets that have got a lot of fish in them, that are, you know, rich in fruit and vegetables. Those fruit and vegetables tend to be locally sourced, locally grown, often people that you know that have grown them, so you're pretty sure that they haven't, you know, travelled halfway across the world and been sprayed full of insecticide and God knows what else. And in those regions, yes, it's true that they culturally do tend to have some alcohol, but look at the way they have their alcohol. Even though I think all alcohol is poisonous, having like one glass of wine with a meal is way better than what we tend to do in other countries, which are, you know, like the UK, US and some of the European countries, is to, you know, avoid alcohol all week and then drink like 10 drinks on a Saturday when you're out at a club, that's a really bad way to consume alcohol, you know, because you're absolutely loading your body up with it so it can't deal with it all. So whilst it's true that those Mediterranean countries do consume alcohol, that doesn't necessarily mean that alcohol is, or the alcohol that they consume is particularly good for you. It just means they're getting away with it because of the context in which they're consuming it in and the culture and the lifestyle that they're living at the same time. Then people will say, but there's something in red wine that's good for your heart. Yes, that's true. There has been a substance in red wine that has been noted to be good for cardiovascular health. However, that substance is, you know, in order to get enough of that substance to show any sort of statistical benefit in cardiovascular health, you would need to drink like 2 bottles of wine a day. And if you drank 2 bottles of wine a day, the health risks from the alcohol content of that would by far outweigh any benefit you got from the substance that is good for cardiovascular health. So that's something that the newspapers have used to kind of sell you this idea, because of course that's a popular headline. You know, if people read, we see it all the time, dark chocolate's fantastic for you, red wine's good for you, don't worry guys, you can have this, that and the other and it's fine. We all like to read that because secretly we want excuses to consume these things, and we can do so guilt-free and then sort of look back at that headline and pretend like that's real. All they've done is cherry pick some details out of that and kind of left out the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, you know, that there isn't enough of that substance in there in a glass of red wine to actually have any beneficial effect. And let's be honest, if you were really worried about your cardiovascular health, you could obtain, you know, vitamins, minerals, and maybe that substance that's in the red wine through a reputable supplier of those things. You wouldn't need to consume it along with poisonous alcohol. You know, there's no need to do that whatsoever. You can actually go and buy vitamins and minerals and all these different substances if that's what you think has got cardiovascular benefit. So I see a lot of people talking about, oh, I wouldn't have white bread, but I only eat whole grain bread. And this is one of the ones you've got to be really careful with. So when you hear people talking about whole grain bread is a lot better for you, it has got a better GI value, a glycemic index. So whereas white bread is like sugar, it's going to shoot your glycogen levels through the roof and your insulin levels through the roof. If you eat a true, properly made whole grain bread, it's going to take a lot longer for your body to break down. Just like we talked about the difference, you know, between eating rolled oats and some porridge, between eating one of these rubbishy breakfast cereals. But a lot of the supermarkets and the food manufacturers will mislabel these things. So it'll say whole grain bread or whatever on it. And when you actually look at it, it's white bread that's been, you know, coloured brown, and then they've chucked a few seeds in there. And so they get away with it because it's got whole grains in it. Yeah, it's got some seeds in it, whatever. But overall, it's still the same quality of bread. And the reason they give you that quality of bread is because that lasts the longest, so they can keep it on the shelf for longer. If they were to give you really well-made, high-quality whole grain bread, it would last on the shelf one day, and then you'd have to throw it all out. You know, when they give you that soft, fluffy junk that they sell in supermarkets, they can keep that on the shelf for 2 or 3 days. So that's a massive profit margin for them. They're not going to eradicate that. They don't care about your health. If you went to an artisanal bread maker, you know, a specialist baker, and you bought a loaf off them, which if any of you have done this or gone to a farmer's market and bought a traditionally made whole grain bread, you'll know it's really dense. It weighs like 3 times more than a normal loaf of bread does. And within a day, it's done. You know, like you would have to then grind it up as breadcrumbs and use it as like a cooking ingredient or something, because it's way too hard by the end of the day to use the next day. So that's the kind of thing that I would recommend buying and having. But that's not particularly cost effective for people, because if it's one person on their own, they're not going to eat the whole loaf. Even if it's like a family of 3 or 4, they might not eat the whole loaf. So you then end up with this kind of lump of bread that's pretty inedible by day 2. And that's why people tend to favour the convenience and the, you know, the financial benefit of buying these other types of loaves of bread, which are much worse for you, even when they're labelled as whole grain. And the last one, this I hear a lot, well, of course it's healthy, it's vegan. Everyone seems to think that all vegan food is really healthy for you and it's great for fat loss. Well, if you were eating like a vegan salad with raw ingredients in it, you know, you had made your own vegan salad, it's true that the types of ingredients you would normally find in that are generally quite low calorie, and you know, that's a really nutrient rich and good thing to eat. So great, I would happily eat that, but that's generally not what people are eating, because that takes a lot of hard work. You know, to get a decent protein profile out of that, you're looking at like 5 to 10 different ingredients. To get a good nutrient profile, the same thing, you're looking at a load of different ingredients, and then you've got to chop it all up, make a salad out of it, and it, without dressing, it tastes pretty lame, to be honest. So then people want to make a dressing as well, which tends to be higher calories. So then we're kind of losing maybe a bit of the lower calorie scenario, because we're starting to add olive oil and stuff like that. Most people can't even be bothered to do that. So when they're eating vegan food, what they actually mean is, well, this has got to be healthy because it's a vegan steak that I've bought, you know, one of these fake meat things, or a vegan burger, or it's like a vegan lasagna, or name any sort of meal, basically the vegan version of that standard meat meal, and they believe that that's somehow healthier. And actually a lot of time it's worse. You know, I was eating vegan stuff for a few years, and I was shocked, you know, when I started really getting into the nitty gritty of what was in a lot of the supermarket sold vegan produce. It was horrendously high in fat, high in salt, high in sugars, high in often a load of unnatural ingredients that you had no clue what they are. They just sounded like a bunch of chemicals. But the reason that they do that is because, of course, they want people to come back and buy more. So if you make it really tasty and it's got the standard addictive ingredients in it that make us want to buy more, like high sugar, for example, then we're going to come back and buy more. If they sold just this sort of vegan bowl of salad that I've just described, number one, it's gone out of date within like a day. Number two, people wouldn't be rushing back to buy it because it doesn't contain anything highly addictive. Highly addictive generally means ridiculously high calories or ridiculously high amounts of taste. So that's where your high salt contents come in, because if you make things really salty, they're pretty moreish, like Pringles, you know. So that can be a false belief that everything vegan is going to be good for losing weight. That simply isn't the case. If you were to be strictly vegan and not chuck loads of condiments and oils and stuff all over it, yes, it would generally be lower calories, but I know very, very few people that are actually doing that. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope that's given you a bit of food for thought as usual. Any comments, stick them below. Keep them constructive. We had some abusive ones the other day. I just deleted them. Got no time for it. But I love some constructive comments, even if it's critical. I'd like to hear your opinions. And I hope you guys are all eating a healthy diet. Stay safe, stay well. Catch you soon.